Take it there? Who gon' take it there? Who gon' take it there? Who gon' take it there? Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air. 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 It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility.
So Jordan Peterson went on that Jubilee show, that 1 versus 20 whole situation that they have, and it's a long form thing, you know, big debate where one person sits in the middle and there's 20 people of the opposite stance, whatever the stance is, surrounding them, and then one at a time they like kind of race for the seat to debate with him. And there's a whole format to it about people getting voted out, whatever. It's designed to kind of keep the conversation moving. It's designed to be salacious conversations. And Sam Cedar did one of these recently where he performed pretty well. But the way it's stacked is interesting, obviously. I mean, it's set up to be that way. It's set up so that if you don't want to debate 20 different people about a subject, then you shouldn't do it. I mean, obviously, it's stacked against you, but it's also designed to be whoever the one person is kind of in control of the conversation. And something that Sam Cedar pointed out about it, too, is that this is filmed in LA. So a lot of the people who get themselves into these seats are trying to be an entertainment in some sense. They're trying to be actors or whatever. And he said that about the group of people that he was debating that were like Christian nationalists. And they were supposed to just be Trump supporters, but a lot of them ended up being like kind of insane when it came to xenophobic nationalism, Christian fundamentalism, that kind of thing. So that's sort of what the debate turned into. And he speculated that that was because, you know, these are people who are trying to say shocking and audacious things because they want to get camera time. So this debate played out a little bit differently than that, although I think he's on to something when it comes to that, especially in that debate particularly. Some of those people were just a little off-putting, very off-putting, actually. This debate, I guess you could say the same thing, but for the most part, Jordan Peterson is the most unhinged person in the room. And he keeps his cool, and it's a mostly respectful conversation. There's some heated moments. This show is pretty good entertainment if you can stomach it. It's quite annoying sometimes to watch the sort of like revolving door of people with salacious arguments. And for example, if you agree with Jordan Peterson in this case, this would be a very annoying debate to watch. Some of the people are a little obnoxious towards him, I think deservedly so. But the same is always true, especially when it's like Trump supporters that are in the circle or whatever. It's like just a lot of yelling and kind of gets into ridiculous arguments sometimes. So for the most part, this one was interesting, except there's a key wrinkle in this sort of concept of this particular video, which is that it was originally framed as 1 Christian versus 20 atheists. That was the whole point of this debate, and that was the original title of the video. But after about 4 hours, they changed the title, apparently, to be Jordan Peterson versus 20 atheists. And the reason for that is because Jordan Peterson refuses to commit to the position of being a Christian in this debate, which is fine for the most part, because you can still argue for Christianity without committing to the position. Except Jordan Peterson likes to make a lot of points about belief, what somebody does or doesn't believe. In fact, that's one of his central premises here, is that atheists reject God without understanding what they're rejecting. But then he does not commit to a position about what he believes, and anytime he's been asked about what he believes, it devolves into a conversation about what the word belief means. And so there's different, ways to think about how that devolves. I think most people who engage with Jordan Peterson for a while that aren't like really fans of him, aren't committed to understanding and agreeing with whatever he says, kind of lose interest after a while because it's just too easy to poke holes in this worldview of his. It's too easy. Every single one of these people does that and out-debates him, in my opinion, just because he is such a confusing communicator on purpose. So we'll start with the first clip. I'm going to go with this clip by clip. and try to not to ramble too much in between. But this first guy essentially starts with the idea that Jordan Peterson has refused to say whether he believes in God, and that pretty much characterizes the rest of this debate. Even though this is set up so that Jordan Peterson kind of controls the premise of it, he's constantly kind of on the back foot about whether or not he believes in this. And that's pretty much how the whole conversation shapes out. So let's start.
Famously, when you've been asked, do you believe in God, the question becomes, what do we mean by God? And in the Bible, it's not even clear the biblical authors know what God is, because Yahweh has historically emerged from an early storm god, a deity that doesn't exhaust the category of deity, and that has changed over the Old Testament. Does God have physicality? Does God not have physicality? It seems like, yes, if you define religion to mean anybody that has an aim, anybody that looks at the unknown, anybody who wants to go from chaos to order is inherently religious, then yes. But also in the same way, I could define atheist as somebody who doesn't dogmatically believe in a religion, or somebody who doesn't regularly attend religious services or belong to a denomination. To help especially the audience kind of like boil this down, there was a lot of words there. The central claim is that we exist somewhere between the finite and the infinite.
A central claim
is that we exist somewhere between the finite and the infinite.
No, I said that we were finite and we had to establish a relationship with the infinite.
Yeah, then in that case, then we're all religious, but then I can do the same thing and define one particular element of atheism. It seems like we both have a reductive view of what the other side looks like, to the point where a conversation seems incoherent, and not just incoherent, but not in the way that the average Christian understands Christianity.
All right, so this guy makes, at the end there, a very important point going forward for the rest of this debate, which is that what Jordan Peterson is talking about is different from what a lot of people understand Christianity to be. And especially in this first conversation, there's like 3 central premises that the debate is based on as it goes on. The first central premise that Jordan lays out is that, like I said, atheists don't understand the God that they're rejecting. And so Jordan makes that point very confidently, and he's made that point before, to the point of telling people that he's debating to their face that they don't understand what they do or don't believe. But then at the same time, Jordan Peterson refuses to commit to the position of what he believes. And also, the way Jordan Peterson communicates what this Christian doctrine means, what the individual stories of this Christian doctrine means, how people should interpret it, how people should fold it into their lives. Not only is it open to interpretation, which he often refuses to concede, he just as often will make that his central point, that it's all open to interpretation. But then he'll say, no, this means a very specific thing, and it's the very specific thing that I'm saying it is. And yet that interpretation is different from what the actual religion and people who follow the religion interpret the doctrine to be saying. And he claims that he's not necessarily a person who follows the religion. And yet he's arguing for this version, this tortured version of Christianity that, I can understand that he's trying to set forth a way to interpret the ideology going forward, less concerned with what Christians do or don't believe, what different individuals do or don't believe. But at the same time, he really runs up against the issue that if he doesn't commit to believing in this religion as he espouses it, it doesn't make sense to be committed to Christianity as an ideology in the way that he is. And in fact, it's highly questionable, because if you believe it, then just say you believe it. Even if you feel that belief is a complicated thing and it's not easy to just say you believe in God, you have to act it out. Okay, that's fine. But just say whether or not you believe in God, and then you can interpret it, act it out however you want, and you can talk about all those things the same way. But there's obviously an incentive for him not wanting to be definite about whether he believes in God. And so then this next guy brings up slavery and brings up the moral conundrum of the fact that slavery is in the Bible and is not, at least in the Old Testament, it is not acknowledged to be a bad thing. In fact, the Bible provides advice on how to keep your slaves properly. So let's listen to that.
So in the Bible, it talks a lot about slavery, right?
Yes.
Yes. So in that, it teaches you how to take care of a slave. Rather than saying slavery's wrong, I think it should say that.
It says that in the story of Moses.
It says slavery is incorrect. It says it's immoral.
That's why Moses leads his people away from slavery.
But why does the Bible predicate and tell people exactly how to take care of a slave? Isn't
Well,
that immoral? Wouldn't you say that culturally we've evolved as a species, as he said earlier about empathy?
Yeah, I would say that the reason we evolved, so to speak, away from slavery was because the West was founded on Judeo-Christian morality.
What, about
All
slavery?
human societies were slavers, so you can't blame that on the Bible.
Well, you can say it bolstered it.
Well, not if you look at the broad sweep of history, because it was the Protestant Christians
Based
in
on
the
their
UK.
interpretation of the Bible.
It was the Protestant Christians.
Which have
in
Okay, so here we are further digging into the idea that the interpretations of the Bible have changed over time, mostly as a result of how the societal expectations of behavior evolved over time. So, in other words, the doctrine's evolution was not on the leading edge necessarily of the development of human society. In certain cases, you can make the argument that it was. This guy here is making the argument that eventually the conditions of society were going to give rise to people who believed that slavery was wrong, that it was essentially an inevitable evolution of human society. And while I think maybe that's a dubious claim, I also think that Jordan's claim that that wouldn't have arisen without Judeo-Christian values is bunk. And he says that you can't say Christianity is responsible for the rise of slavery because all societies were responsible for slavery in some form. But Christianity was certainly complicit in slavery, but he does credit Christianity for essentially the abolishment of slavery, which, even if it's true that there was a group of Christians that advocated for the end of slavery and that was part of what got the ball rolling, you know, the idea that Christianity is what ended slavery outright across the world is wrong. So again, it's like people who have good moral intentions might be able to push the conversation forward, but usually that's going to be against the grain and against the wishes of their superiors in any given structural religion. That's the story of slavery being ended, is that in all vectors of society, the people who were advocating for it to be ended were castigated and in many cases murdered because they were toying with the structure of society. Slavery was as much, if not more, of a structure of society as religion, any religion. And so these things are holistically intertwined, and to credit religion with the downfall of slavery is insane. It's obviously, you know, different developments that happen in society that, again, are intertwined with religion, and so religion is a part of it. But Jordan runs into the issue here of wanting to credit the positive developments of history to Christianity, but the negative developments of history that are explicitly tied to Christianity, he wants to say that that's more complicated and that, that's where the other factors of society come in. So more incoherence from him. This next guy, I think this guy's name is Parker. I'm pretty sure that he does debates on YouTube. So you guys should look for him because I've seen his stuff before. I think it's like he does these like 20v1 debates on his own where he'll, Parker debates 20 Trump supporters or something. I've seen his videos. He's a good debater. He must have wanted to get on this program. And so he is trying to pin down Jordan on what he believes. And as usual, him posing the question, do you believe in God? What do you believe to be true? Devolves into Jordan Peterson kind of word spaghettiing about what belief means and what belief doesn't mean and why it's impossible to define that. So let's check this out real quick.
Sure. So do you believe in the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good notion of God?
What do you mean by believe?
Do you think it to be true?
That's the circular definition. What do you mean
How
when
is
you
that
say
circular?
you believe?
How is that circular?
Because you added no content to the answer by substituting the word true and believe.
I said you think it to be true.
All right. So if
What's
you
a
believe
belief?
something, you stake your life on it.
You wouldn't lie to save your life?
How much do you know about me? I didn't lie to save my career. I didn't lie to save my clinical practice.
Would you lie to like save your children, your mom, your dad?
I don't think lying would save them.
Can there ever be a circumstance logically that lying could save someone?
Yeah, and if you're steeped in sin, you're likely to live in circumstances like that.
I'll give you an example. If you're like in like Nazi Germany, and it is the case that there's like Jewish people in your attic and you're trying
I
to
know
protect
the
them,
example.
would you lie to like the Nazis? If
I
they're
would have
Nazi?
done everything I bloody well could, so I wouldn't be in that situation
you
to begin
lie?
with. It's a hypothetical, and it's
You
not
can't answer
answerable.
hypotheticals?
No, I can't answer a hypothetical like
What?
that because
Did
it's
you eat
far.
today?
Look, I wouldn't be in that scenario.
Obviously, right? Logically, because that's
No.
already happened. Like, that's in the past. You don't have a time travel device. We're bringing this logical hypothetical up to show you that in some circumstances that do happen within the real world, you would lie to save people's lives. So your definition of truth isn't actually how we're typically using it. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to muddy the waters when I ask you, like, do you believe this? Do you think this to be true? So you don't actually have to answer the questions. And plenty of Christians don't like that because they clearly see that you don't really like want to be associated with
I can
Christianity. with that
imagine
respect.
that I was in a situation where the best I could do as a consequence of my previous mistakes was to tell the least amount of
So
lie
this is a
I could
weird
manage.
moment for Jordan. And, you know, something about this guy, it always gets weird when the Nazis come up. That's something to notice about Jordan Peterson. He always gets a little squeamish. He gets particularly bad at answering questions when the Nazis come up. And I've heard him say, you know, I don't like Nazis, I hate Nazis when pressed. But often he ends up in these weird, like, sort of circular conversations, which you could argue is because people confront him with that and he's offended. But most people, when confronted with the question, if you were hiding a Jew from the Nazis, would you lie to protect their lives? I don't know why you would be housing them if you weren't going to lie to the Nazis. And most people would answer that question, yes, it is not only would I lie in that situation, it is absolutely, undeniably, morally correct to lie in that position. I mean, period. That's a pretty easy one. It's an easy one. And Jordan Peterson has been lobbed many easy questions about Nazis, and he just is not good at answering these questions. So what he's really saying here is that he doesn't believe in lying because that is like a fundamental truth to him. And so that's something that he believes so deeply that he would die about it. Okay, that's great. That's a good value. But then Parker pretty easily, pretty swiftly presents him with a situation where it would be morally correct to lie and presents Jordan with that question. Now, this is the benefit of being able to use your own logic and your own conscience to decide what's right and wrong. Because any normal person, even your average incredibly religious person who also feels that they would rather die than lie, would not hesitate, I would hope, to lie to the face of Nazis who are looking for Jews. Now, obviously, there's parallels in our current society that we could get into, but we're not going to get into that. We're explicitly talking about Nazi Germany here, and most people acknowledge that lying to Nazis and maybe doing other bad things to Nazis is a good thing, right? Jordan Peterson is not comfortable making that designation, usually seemingly because he feels like it's some kind of trap, but also in this case, because he says that he would make decisions in his life that would lead him to never being in that position to have to tell a lie, which is odd. It's an odd thing to say because in a way, if I want to entertain him, I get what he's saying because this is a guy who, made a big stink because of this whole thing in Canada that he thought was compelled speech. And he is right that he tanked his psychology career and in many ways his reputation in order to take on this crusade against trans people. And he didn't have to do any of that. He got to a pretty high level of prolificness. He could have cruised for the rest of his life without taking this hardcore stance. Supposedly it's because he believes it and he would rather tell the truth about what he believes than lie to protect himself and others. So, okay, that's fine. But at the same time, Jordan Peterson is a person who recognizes and has talked about the fact that humans' capacity for evil is so ever-present that as a human, you have to be constantly on guard for it in yourself and in others, right? So I don't see how it's sufficient to say that he would just make decisions in his life that would prevent him, that he would speak out against the Nazis and then he would get banned or kicked out of Germany or killed or whatever. Or he would be jailed so that if you are a person in Nazi Germany and they're coming after Jews are looking for places to go, the morally correct thing to do, at least in a limited instance, is to help protect Jewish people from the Nazis. It's the morally correct thing to do. So you could argue that if you're a good Christian in that position in Nazi Germany, then that's one of the decisions that you could make to prevent your soul from being corrupted and rotted. And by not making that decision, Jordan might be saying, you could interpret what he's saying as he wouldn't put himself in a position to be questioned by Nazis about whether he's hiding Jews, meaning he wouldn't do that. And I don't want to be that negative about what he's saying here, but like he is leaving the door open to that conclusion. And it would be one way for him to prevent himself from being in the position of lying to Nazis, is to not do something you would have to lie to Nazis about, which, again, I think most people would argue is the morally incorrect position. And remember, all of this came about because he refused to answer a question about what he believes, and then he refused to answer a question about would he lie to Nazis. These are easy questions, folks, and it's been years. Jordan Peterson has gotten these same questions for years, and he refuses to answer them every time. And I don't think he really understands how stuck in the mud he particularly gets on these questions and how questionable it is to the average person who's watching that. So I don't know. Hopefully that raised a couple eyebrows in this particular debate. Let's watch these last couple clips and then call it a day.
You're saying atheists worship things or people or places, whatever. Can you be very clear about your definition of worship again?
Attend to, prioritize, and sacrifice for.
Okay, that's it. That's your understanding of worship.
Well, I could flesh it out, but that'll do for the time we have.
Are you familiar with the Immaculate Conception?
Why is that relevant?
Because you go to a Catholic church, don't you? Or you've attended recently. You're interested in Catholicism, aren't you?
Sure.
All right. Are you familiar with their doctrines?
Somewhat.
Okay, you're
Their
familiar.
doctrines are very
how do they
deep.
regard Mary?
Why are you asking me that?
Because you're a Christian.
You say that. I haven't claimed that.
Oh, what is this? Is this Christians versus atheists?
I don't know.
You don't know where you are right now.
Don't be a smartass.
Well,
and I mean
either you're a
'cause I
Christian
won't
or you're
talk
not.
to you if you're a smartass.
Oh, either you're a Christian or you're not. Which one is it?
I could be either of them, but I don't have to tell you.
You don't have to tell me. I was under the impression
private.
I was invited to talk to a Christian. Am I not talking to a Christian?
No, you were invited to.
I think everyone should look at the title of the YouTube channel. You're probably in the wrong YouTube video,
You're really quite something, you are.
aren't I? But you're really quite nothing, right? You're not a Christian.
Okay, I'm done with him.
You can't say I do know or I don't know that this story is false or true in an ontological, historical sense as a historical fact. Were there two people like that were specifically referenced?
Okay, I don't think that's knowable, but
Right.
I'm not sure why it matters
Right.
to you.
So the reason why it matters to me is because we need to know how we should interpret the things that the Bible says and the things
Many ways.
Right, but like if we interpret
Sometimes poetry, sometimes history, sometimes fact,
But for
sometimes
example,
metaphor.
the reason why it's important, right, very important, is because, for example, we can talk about something like God says, I believe it's like 1 Corinthians 15:17, something about how belief in God specifically as someone who resurrected or as someone who died for our sins is important, right? But we have to look at, if we can interpret that as just like, you have to believe that God is a symbol of sacrifice. That is different from believing that there was an actual person named Jesus Christ who died on the cross for our
That's
sins.
true.
So if you believe one and not the other, that can be the difference between you going to hell and you going to heaven. So if we cannot make, like, we cannot say that we know whether or not certain historical facts in the Bible happen, like even as just like events, like because the events matter, because again, God dying for our sins on the cross was an event. If we can't say that we know these things happened, these things did or didn't happen, this then leads us to kind of like the conundrum of how do we know what we are meant to believe, what the Bible intended for us to believe, and this can be very, very important to like our fate. Do you see what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
I've got no disagreement with any of that. What sort of response do you want from that?
So
You pushed me beyond the limits of my knowledge.
Really?
Well,
I think that's
there's so many things you can't know.
All right, so these last two I smashed together. This first kid is not charitable to Jordan Peterson at all, pretty much just rips into him and correctly points out that he believes in nothing and that this game that he's playing, you know, trying to pretend he's not a Christian, he is a Christian, that he is just like toying with people. And, you know, this is the way this kid talks to Jordan. It comes off as fairly obnoxious. But this is the way you talk to somebody who is outright lying the way Jordan is. So I respect him for this. Jordan immediately decides that he doesn't want to talk to him. And I mean, I get it, because there's not that much to say when somebody says, oh, you're really something, and then the response is, you're really nothing. I mean, it's a pretty brutal response, but you know, it makes sense that Jordan cut off the conversation there. But then the next person This was actually at the end of the debate where Jordan Peterson decided, he gets to pick one person who gets to make a point to him, and then they debate about that. It's a reversal of the structure of the rest of the debate. He picks this girl because he felt that she had constructive and honest questions in talking to him. And I will say that she did a great job here because she does approach it in a pretty charitable way. She articulates his perspective well and then builds on it with questions, and so that engages Jordan and makes him feel like she is a good faith interlocutor. And then at the end, she points out, she's given her own little interview, and she points out pretty specifically the problems with Jordan Peterson's ideology and the dishonesty of it. But she doesn't focus on that when she's debating with him, which I think was an effective tactic, because then that allowed him to put her in the chair and essentially make her point against him, which ends up being the final blow to his whole thesis. I mean, it was the perfect way for this video to end, because she essentially gets him to admit that he cannot provide any justification for why his interpretation of the Bible is the correct one. And she correctly points out that as somebody who would be interested in following the doctrine of Christianity so they don't go to hell, which interpretation is the correct one is a very important question to be asking. And Jordan Peterson, with these tortured interpretations, you could argue there's some value to extracting, meaning from some of these stories in the relatively tortured way that he does, because it allows you to take the best case scenario of any of these given stories, some of which can be rather horrific, and interpret that into your life. And I think there's some value there. But that's not the same as following the doctrine of God. And if Jordan Peterson wants to, just throw interesting interpretations of the Bible and various religions out there, that's great. But he's making the case that if you don't follow his interpretation or one like it or some interpretation of the Bible, that bad things are going to happen to you and your life is going to fall apart. He does seem to treat it less literally than saying you're going to go to hell. Again, Jordan Peterson has never said that he believes in heaven or hell. He refuses to say that. And he instead kind of articulates a more hell on earth type of vision. Like, you can put yourself in hell by making the wrong decisions that are not aligned with truth and whatever you worship. That's essentially his claim, and his claim is that all people worship something, and the best thing to worship is Christianity in his mind. At least he comes right up on the edge of saying that. But ultimately, all of these people are trying to make the point to him that he is creating versions and interpretations of this text that is not the same as what the broad swaths of Christians believe, and in some cases it goes against what Christians believe. And so him presenting this as not only an interesting and valuable interpretation of writings that were done at some point, but he's trying to find a justification for people to say that they believe in God, even though they don't explicitly believe in the text of the Bible. And he wants to make Christianity and Judeo-Christian values or whatever something that can be claimed by people that do not want to commit to the substance of the Bible. And she is correct for pointing out to him here that is not necessarily aligned with the project of Christianity. And because of that, Jordan Peterson remains a very controversial figure, even amongst religious types. I think most people who are not religious agree that his central purpose is to kind of launder religion to non-religious people. He has been quite successful in doing that. And I think ultimately, anytime he's in a debate setting, it's kind of actually good for the discourse, because he does not hold up well in debates. I've watched a fair amount of Jordan Peterson debates, and he gets washed all the time. And I'm not the type of person that can't admit if somebody that I disagree with has a, superior debate performance or comes off better than the other person. Jordan Peterson usually doesn't, because in using all of this nebulous language and all of these circular arguments, he just allows whoever he's talking to make the obviously more coherent, more straightforward, and more cutting points. he is just an incredibly vulnerable debater because he can't make his points without stretching every word past his limits. And so I don't think he really quite realizes how thoroughly he was outwitted by this last girl here. Her name was Zena, I think. So she did a good job, and it's a good example of how even if you're going to debate somebody, even if it's an incredibly detestable person like Jordan Peterson, it's best to do it in a way that they feel that you're in good faith, because that's going to allow you to make the most devastating points against them. So it's just one debate tactic. I've talked on this channel before about whether debates are even worth doing at all. I think in some cases they are. I think when you can make Jordan Peterson look as bad as he looks here, it's probably worth doing. But then at the same time, it makes Jubilee a lot of money that they can spend on, I don't know, smartphone drone strikes or something, whatever they're spending that money on. So who knows? It's up in the air. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. And if you really want to support, consider becoming a member. That's the best way to support this channel. I'm posting different kinds of exclusive content there, like podcasts that don't make it to the main channel. Also music. I've got a new EP out right now called Dead Internet Theory, which is now available on all platforms, and that was available first for members only. I also re-released a previous EP called Spaceman Spliff. That's available now on the main channel with a bonus track included, and that was also available first for members only. So if you're interested in early access to music and other things like that, go ahead and hit that follow button. Go ahead and become a member. And if there's other types of content that you'd like to see as exclusive content, let me know and we'll figure some things out.